the dead of night. A time when shadows stretch and whisper, when the world sleeps and nightmares come out to play. Tonight we delve into the world of those who navigate these dark hours, those who answer the call of hunger, even when it leads them down paths they wish they could forget. Pizza delivery drivers. We've scoured the darkest corners of the internet, the depths of online forums, and spoken to those who've sworn to never deliver after dark again. Get ready to sink your teeth into 5 terrifying tales of pizza deliveries gone wrong. These are the stories that will make you think twice before ordering that late-night snack. Because sometimes the scariest thing about a pizza delivery isn't the extra anchovies. It's what might be waiting for you on the other side of the door. Our first tale takes us to the outskirts of a bustling city, where a delivery driver named Sarah found herself facing a different kind of fear. The fear of the unknown. It was a stormy Tuesday night, rain lashing against the windows of the pizzeria. Sarah was just finishing up her shift, relieved to be escaping the weather when the order came in. It was for a single large pizza, extra cheese, no sauce, a strange order, but not unheard of. But it was the delivery address that gave her pause. It was miles outside of their usual delivery zone, deep in a rural area with no streetlights and a reputation for being unsettling. Her manager, eager to close up, assured her it would be fine, a quick in and out. Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed, her gut churning with a feeling of unease. As Sarah drove, the storm intensified. Rain hammered against the windshield, blurring the already unfamiliar roads. Her GPS led her further and further away from civilization, the houses giving way to dense forests and fields shrouded in mist. The feeling of unease intensified, replaced by a creeping dread. The further she drove, the more isolated she felt, the storm seeming to cut her off from the rest of the world. The GPS finally announced her arrival, but all Sarah saw was a dirt track leading into a thicket of trees. She checked the address again, heart sinking. This couldn't be right, but just then she saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. With a mix of apprehension and relief, Sarah cautiously turned onto the dirt track, her car bumping along the uneven ground. The dirt track finally opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows glowing with that same eerie light she'd seen from the road. A lone figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. As Sarah stepped out of the car, the wind seemed to howl around her, whipping her hair across her face. The rain had eased slightly, but the air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, something metallic. Clutching the pizza box, Sarah cautiously approached the figure, her hand trembling. "Delivery," she called out, her voice barely audible above the wind. But as she got closer, she realized something was wrong. Very wrong. The figure hadn't moved. It stood motionless, almost unnatural. And as Sarah took another step closer, the light from the cabin flickered, plunging the clearing into momentary darkness. When the light flickered back on, the figure was gone, vanished without a trace. The clearing was empty, the only sound the relentless drumming of the rain and the wind whistling through the trees. Panic welled up inside Sarah. She spun around, searching for any sign of the figure, her heart pounding in her chest. Had she imagined it? Was this some kind of cruel prank, or was something far more sinister at play? The clock ticked past 9 p.m., casting long, eerie shadows across the bustling pizzeria. Sarah, a college student working part-time, glanced nervously at the order slips piling up. Delivering pizzas wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Little did she know this night would take her on a journey into the heart of fear. A sudden ring shattered the relative quiet of the pizzeria. A call for a delivery to Harrington House. Locals whispered tales of the old Victorian mansion on Harrington Crest, a place shrouded in chilling legends. The hair on Sarah's arms prickled with a sense of unease as she heard the address. Sarah tried to shake off the feeling. It was just an old house, she told herself, forcing a brave face as she grabbed the keys to her rusty hatchback. As she navigated through the storm-lashed streets, the stories she had heard about Harrington House echoed in her mind, fueling her growing apprehension. The tales spoke of a family met with a gruesome end within those walls, their souls unable to find peace. Their tormented spirits, it was said, remained trapped, forever haunting the house. Each story, more chilling than the last, played in Sarah's mind like a horror film as she approached the imposing gates of Harrington House. Rain lashed down, blurring the world beyond her windshield as Sarah pulled up to the house. The old iron gates, adorned with menacing gargoyles, stood open as if inviting her in. A shiver ran down her spine. This place felt different, colder. She stepped out of the car, the only sound the howling wind and the rhythmic thud of her heart against her ribs. Gathering her courage, she lifted the pizza warmer and walked towards the front door, each step heavy with dread. A sense of foreboding pressed down on her, whispering that she should turn back. As she reached out to knock, the door creaked open as if beckoning her inside. "Hello?" she called out, her voice a shaky whisper in the oppressive silence. No answer, only the echoing emptiness that seemed to amplify her fear. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind her, the sound like a scream in the dead silence. Sarah jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She was trapped. Panic welled up inside her, threatening to consume her. She fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. She was trapped inside Harrington House, alone with whatever unseen entity might be lurking in the shadows. The air grew heavy, thick with a palpable sense of dread. A cold spot settled over her, raising goosebumps on her arms despite the warmth of her jacket. The temperature seemed to drop, and an unsettling feeling washed over her, whispering that she was not alone. Suddenly a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, echoing through the house. Sarah froze, her blood turning to ice in her veins. The scream seemed to come from upstairs, filled with a raw terror that sent shivers down her spine. Driven by a primal instinct to escape, Sarah ran towards the faint light emanating from under a door at the end of the hallway. Each step was met with the sound of her own ragged breathing and the pounding of her own heart. She had to get out, had to escape the nightmare unfolding around her. She threw open the door, finding herself in a dusty old library. Books lined the shelves, their leather bindings cracked with age. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room. And in the center, seated in a high-backed armchair, was a figure. Her breath caught in her throat. It was an old woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief. "Help me," the woman croaked, her voice raspy and weak. "They're here." Before Sarah could respond, a cold wind slammed the library door shut, plunging the room into darkness. The fire sputtered and died, leaving them in absolute blackness. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She could hear the old woman's terrified gasps, feel the woman's trembling hand clutching at her arm. Sarah stumbled back, fear propelling her towards the window. She had to get out, had to escape the madness of Harrington House. With a surge of adrenaline, she threw her weight against the window, shattering the glass. The cold night air hit her face, a welcome relief from the suffocating atmosphere of the house. She scrambled through the broken window, ignoring the shards of glass that tore at her skin. She ran without looking back, the screams of the old woman echoing in her ears, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within the walls of Harrington House. Our next story takes us deep into the unsettling world of paranoia and fear. Imagine, if you will, the life of a pizza delivery driver, navigating the dark streets alone, each delivery a gamble in the dead of night. Tonight, our story centers around one such driver, a young man named David, who finds himself plagued by an unsettling feeling as he begins his shift. David shrugs off the initial unease as a trick of his imagination, the result of too much caffeine and late-night horror movies. As he sets out on his deliveries, the streets are alive with the usual symphony of city sounds. Distant sirens, the rumble of engines, the occasional bark of a dog. But something feels different tonight. A prickling at the back of his neck, the sensation of being watched, a pair of headlights that seem to follow him a little too closely. At first, David dismisses it as mere coincidence. After all, it's a Friday night and the roads are bustling with activity. But as he makes his way through his route, the feeling persists. The same car, a nondescript sedan with tinted windows, seems to reappear with alarming regularity. Every time David glances in his rearview mirror, those piercing headlights seem to bore into him, fueling the growing unease in his gut. He tries to rationalize the situation, telling himself it's just his imagination running wild. But deep down, a primal instinct whispers a chilling truth. He's being followed. And as the night wears on, the line between reality and paranoia begins to blur, plunging David deeper into a terrifying game of cat and mouse. With each passing mile, the tension inside David's car thickens, his pulse quickens, his breaths grow shallow. He tries to focus on the road, on the comforting familiarity of his delivery route, but the shadowy sedan remains a constant presence in his rearview mirror. It's always there, lurking just beyond the reach of his headlights, a silent stalker in the night. David's mind races, desperately searching for a logical explanation. Maybe it's just someone heading in the same direction, a harmless coincidence blown out of proportion by his own mounting fear. But the way the car mirrors his every turn, every stop, every acceleration, feels far too deliberate to be mere chance. He tries to shake off his pursuer, taking unexpected turns down narrow side streets, speeding up, slowing down. But the sedan remains relentless, always maintaining a steady distance, like a predator toying with its prey. The feeling of dread intensifies, a cold sweat clinging to David's skin as the terrifying reality sets in. He's not just being followed, he's being hunted. The once familiar streets now seem menacing, every shadow a potential hiding place for his stalker. The comforting glow of streetlights now feels like beacons illuminating his every move for the unseen eyes that watch him from the darkness. David knows he needs to act to find a way to escape this nightmare, but fear has him trapped in its icy grip. As the night deepens, so does David's desperation. He knows he can't outrun his pursuer forever. The shadowy sedan is always there, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just behind him. He needs a plan, and fast. His mind races, considering and discarding options as quickly as they form. He thinks about calling for help, but who would believe him? A pizza delivery driver spooked by a car on a Friday night? He'd sound paranoid, delusional. He dismisses the idea, knowing he's on his own in this terrifying game of cat and mouse. His thoughts turn to his next delivery, a house at the end of a long, desolate road on the outskirts of town. It's isolated, away from the relative safety of the city lights, but it's also his only chance. David decides to use the upcoming delivery as bait, a desperate gamble to outsmart his stalker. He'll pretend to make the delivery, but instead he'll use the cover of darkness to his advantage, slipping away unnoticed while his pursuer waits in vain. It's a risky plan, fraught with uncertainty, but as he grips the steering wheel, his knuckles white with tension, he realizes it's the only option he has left. He accelerates towards the address, his heart pounding in his chest, a mixture of fear and adrenaline coursing through his veins. The shadowy sedan follows closely behind, its headlights like the eyes of a predator, reflecting David's growing terror. David's car screeches to a halt in front of the secluded house, its dilapidated facade barely visible in the dim moonlight. The engine sputters and dies, plunging him into an eerie silence broken only by his own ragged breathing. He can see the sedan slowing down, its headlights cutting through the darkness as it parks a safe distance away, waiting, watching. He grabs the pizza, a flimsy shield against the unknown terror that awaits him, and steps out of the car. Each step feels heavy, as if he's wading through thick mud. He casts a furtive glance back at the sedan, its dark windows offering no glimpse of the person or thing lurking inside. The air hangs thick with anticipation, the silence punctuated by the distant chirping of crickets. He makes his way towards the house, his hand trembling as he reaches into his pocket for his phone. He needs to call for help, to get someone, anyone, out here before it's too late. But as he fumbles with the device, his thumb hovering over the emergency call button, a blood-curdling scream pierces the night. It's a sound filled with raw terror, a desperate plea for help that chills him to the bone. His blood runs cold. He recognizes that scream. It belongs to the homeowner, the person he's supposed to be delivering to. Terror grips him as a horrifying realization dawns. He led his stalker straight to his victim. He's not just a target anymore, he's an accomplice. Our final tale takes us on a chilling ride with Sarah, a seasoned pizza delivery driver who thought she'd seen it all. Years of navigating the city's underbelly, from dimly lit suburbs to desolate back roads, had hardened her to the usual anxieties of the job. But tonight, something felt different. A palpable shift in the atmosphere that sent a shiver down her spine. It was supposed to be her last delivery before calling it a night. A routine drop-off to a familiar address on the outskirts of town. The order was simple: a large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, and a side of breadsticks. It was a regular order from a regular customer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who always tipped generously and greeted her with a warm smile. But tonight, the familiar comfort of the routine was replaced by an unsettling unease that gnawed at the edges of Sarah's mind. The roads were eerily quiet, the usual Friday night buzz replaced by an unsettling stillness. The streetlights flickered intermittently, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on her eyes. Even the familiar hum of her car engine seemed louder, amplified by the oppressive silence that enveloped her. As Sarah turned onto Mr. Henderson's street, a wave of unease washed over her. The houses, usually bathed in the warm glow of porch lights, were shrouded in darkness, their windows like vacant eyes staring back at her. The air grew heavy, thick with an unspoken tension that sent a prickle of fear crawling up her spine. Sarah pulled up to Mr. Henderson's house, its once welcoming facade now shrouded in an unsettling gloom. The porch light usually left on for her arrival was off, casting the front yard in deep shadow. An unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the distant chirping of crickets and the pounding of her own heart. She grabbed the pizza, her fingers instinctively checking the pepper spray tucked into her pocket, a habit she'd developed after years of late-night deliveries. As she stepped out of the car, the interior light flickered and died, plunging her into darkness. A shiver ran down her spine, a primal fear triggered by the sudden absence of light and the oppressive silence that pressed in around her. She cautiously approached the front door, her senses on high alert. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet that made her stomach churn. She raised her hand to knock, but hesitated. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the sound of her own breathing and the distant howl of a dog. Where was Mr. Henderson? He always greeted her at the door, eager for his Friday night pizza and a friendly chat. The thought sent a chill down her spine, a cold dread seeping into her bones. As Sarah stood frozen on the porch, her hand hovering inches from the door, a glint of metal caught her eye. It was faint, barely perceptible in the darkness, but it was enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through her. She squinted, her gaze drawn to the edge of the porch swing, where a small silver object lay half hidden in the shadows. With cautious steps, she moved closer, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the swing, she leaned down to get a better look, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized the object. It was a pair of reading glasses, the frames bent and twisted, lying amidst shards of broken glass. Mr. Henderson's reading glasses. A wave of nausea washed over her as a horrifying realization dawned. Something was terribly wrong. Mr. Henderson was meticulous, always keeping his belongings in order. He would never just leave his glasses lying broken on the porch. The smell that had assaulted her earlier, the metallic tang in the air, suddenly made sickening sense. Her gaze darted to the ground and her blood ran cold. A dark, viscous pool of liquid stained the porch beneath the swing, reflecting the faint moonlight like a grotesque, macabre mirror. It was blood, and from the looks of it, a lot of it. Fear, raw and primal, surged through her, urging her to flee. But a sense of duty, a sliver of hope that Mr. Henderson might still be alive, kept her rooted to the spot. Sarah found herself at a crossroads, her mind a whirlwind of fear and indecision. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get as far away from the house as possible. The sight of the blood, the unsettling silence, the broken glasses, it all pointed towards a horrifying truth she didn't want to confront. But the thought of leaving Mr. Henderson, of abandoning him in his time of need, filled her with a sense of guilt she couldn't ignore. What if he was hurt, bleeding, in desperate need of help? Could she live with herself knowing she had the chance to help but chose to run? With trembling hands she pulled out her phone, the cold metal a stark contrast to the warmth of the blood she now knew stained the porch. Her thumb hovered over the emergency call button, her mind racing, torn between her own safety and the desperate hope that she wasn't already too late. The decision was made for her as a gut-wrenching moan, weak and laced with pain, echoed from inside the house. It was a sound that shattered the silence, a desperate plea for help that cut through the fear paralyzing her. Mr. Henderson was alive, and he needed her help. So there you have it, folks. Terrifying tales of pizza deliveries gone wrong, reminding us that even the most mundane jobs can take a sinister turn when you're navigating the shadows of the night. Next time you order that late-night pizza, spare a thought for the brave souls delivering it. They might be facing more than just a tip.